Hello and welcome to episode 139 of AviaDev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. In this episode, I'm delighted to say that I'm bringing somebody to the microphone that I've had the pleasure to get to know during the pandemic, as he's joined on a couple of AviaDev webinars and also has many years of global aviation experience, which has been great for me to tap into too. He's decided that now is the time to focus his efforts on supporting the African market and has just launched the Tuscar Aero Clinic. David Aher is the managing director of Tuscar. They are a group of aviation advisors supporting our great industry. So welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Great. So as I mentioned, you have vast experience. So give us a bit of an overview of your background and your specific expertise.
Okay, John, for the last 30 years, I've been in aviation, of which prior to 2016, when I founded Tuscar, I spent 16 years working in the aviation leasing community. I worked for some of the top leasing companies in the world in a senior executive position. And with that time, my focus was dealing with airlines in emerging markets, primarily in the EMEA, former CS countries, and of course, also some of the Baltic states. And during that period of time, when you're dealing with airlines from the emerging markets, there's a lot more due diligence done prior to leasing the aircraft, and during the leasing phase, there's a lot more active engagement with the airlines on oversight during midterm audits. During every year, you audit the aircraft, audit the records to get an oversight of how the airlines work. And so that period gave me a lot of insight on how these airlines worked and the difficulties they experienced in leasing aircraft, primarily at the end of lease, handing aircraft back. So as a result of this, I got a lot more of an insight how the various departments within the airlines worked. Primarily have your engineering, your operations, your quality control, so on. They work very well collectively together, but however, when you look at the individual departments, there's not always that line of communication between them. An action of one has a knock-on effect on the other. So trying to understand that dynamic was very interesting for me. So in 2016, when I launched Tuscar, the objective was to leave the leasing sector and work at the other side of the table with the airlines. Excuse me. And my plan was to go forward with them and leverage the expertise I'd learned to help airlines in emerging markets gain access to the leasing sector and bring some of the experience I learned from my previous experience of airlines to say, this is what the leasing community have concerns about. How can we address those concerns now, especially areas like corporate governance, transparency protocols, and safety, and then work with those airlines to make them more attractive to the investor community. And that's how it all started off.
Right. Amazing. So the big question, of course, is why Africa? Why focus on Africa? You've got experience in all those different markets. Why Africa, and why is now the time to focus on that?
Africa is hugely untapped. It's a massive continent with great potential. If you look at the size of Africa, I put a map up on LinkedIn a couple of weeks back where you can fit the whole of America, you can fit China, you can fit India, and half of Europe into Africa. It's a massive continent space. And I think that the African continent as a whole hasn't quite understood the value that aviation brings and the potential revenue that aviation can generate within the continent. If we take, for example, Europe has a population of 500 million people, 500 million. And in 2019, that community of people, the aviation sector contributed in the region of about 695 billion to the economies of the European states. Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, the population of around about 1.1 billion people, and it contributed 51 billion. So you have twice the population contributing only 10% into the coffers of those economies. Huge potential. Also, the African sector historically has not had a great depth of expertise in aviation. If you look back over their history, some airlines have come and gone, and it doesn't quite have a depth of knowledge there. The amount of success hasn't been as strong as it should have been. And I think going forward with a lot of the younger generation now becoming more educated, a lot more surplus income available to people want to travel, people want to experience the world. On top of that, there's not a huge amount of connectivity within Africa. There's not a huge role in rail infrastructure. And as COVID-19 has now brought to the forefront that aviation with respect to not just transporting people, but also raw materials, goods, medical supplies, raw materials coming from other parts of the world into the countries or being exported out of the countries, it's now brought to attention of how important aviation is to the actual economies of those respective countries. So I think there's a huge potential. And I think people like myself and my team at Tuscar have both the international expertise and the expertise from our team that are African based to bring that knowledge to play and to bring it to bear benefit to the African community. And that's where we started in Africa.
Absolutely. And we'll get back to the team and the clinic and the proposal that Tuscar's bringing. But let's talk about where the opportunities themselves actually lie. We've talked about the potential, but specifically, you know, where do we see the areas of focus from your side in terms of taking aviation on the continent forward, especially in light of the current pandemic?
Well, I think huge opportunities exist in the current climate. Unfortunately, what the climate has done, it's been a horrible event. It knows no boundaries, and it's one of these events whereby, like I said, it's impacted aviation unbelievably. But at the same time, it has provided opportunities. There will be a lot of fallout. There will be a lot of airlines that have entered the pandemic with underlying financial difficulties. However, there are airlines that will be able to weather the storm, but they'll have to take a lot more of a pragmatic approach and modify and pivot their business model to adapt for it. But I think going forward, there is an opportunity for new airlines will take over, fill the voids left by previous airlines. As an example, we look at Nigeria. There's a few airlines opening up in Nigeria. There's one opening up in South Africa. And I think an opportunity presents itself for new emerging airlines to come in. They're coming in with a clean slate. They have no legacy debt issues, no legacy bloated workforce. They're coming in understanding they're working in a difficult climate. They have the pick of the workforce now because a lot of unemployment, so they can pick the right workforce, be it pilots, be it air crew, be it engineers. They have the opportunity to source product from the leasing community a lot cheaper and a lot more preferential rates than they would have had before, because a lot of the leasing community of aircraft now parked up with no potential customers. They have the opportunity to negotiate better preferential terms with the governments and the airports and all the supply services for them. So there's an opportunity to leverage that, to take benefit from that, and to work collectively with all the stakeholders to kickstart the community again. So I think there's great potential there. Also for smaller airlines, I think the opportunity allows itself to reevaluate their current position, to re-examine their business plans, and to maybe throttle back a bit, examine what their strategy is going to be for the next 6 months, and build a more pragmatic, holistic approach and get through 6 months at a time. And I think going forward, the lessons learned now will add benefit going forward. The idea is to learn from the past, take that experience on board, but develop going forward. However, I do believe that the industry is not going to open up overnight. This idea, because the 1st of October, that all of a sudden the borders will open up, we're not going to go back to 100% capacity. It will take time. But at the same time, it's important for all the governments and all the various stakeholders to get actively involved, because now they begin to realize how important aviation is to the economies of their respective countries. So I think it's a prime opportunity. And I think, why not use it now?
Absolutely. And just to pick up on your last point there, you know, you say it's a great opportunity for governments to get involved, but obviously we want to clarify what you mean by that in terms of how much involvement. And you know, governments have always been involved in the aviation sector across the world in terms of creating flag carriers and national airlines and having investments in aviation infrastructure because it's so important and it's so capital intensive. So within Africa, what is the right model? You know, what are governments doing right? What are they doing wrong? And how can they support the sector?
The dynamic between the governments and their involvement in the aviation sector is always quite interesting. If you take, for example, we take two of the biggest airlines in the African continent at present. You have one, you have South African Airways, and the other one is Ethiopian. One is becoming a great success story, and the other, unfortunately, is suffering, struggling at the moment. We take South Africa. Since 2011, it hasn't made profit. It's now, COVID-19 has magnified the failings, the lack of I would say optics on the business and the lack of oversight. We take the likes of Ethiopian, which has continued to make profit throughout the whole process, even as far as I think the reports in July of this year have said they still made profit, not much, but they still made profit because they diverted quite quickly to cargo. So you have two cases where both are government-owned entities, but I think the difference is that the level of involvement the government has in running the airline plays a big role. I think in some cases, too much involvement by the government and too much political interference can actually stifle the airline. Whereas I think if you're going to run an airline, like any business, you have to leave it up to professionals. if it's a government, you're going to hire the right staff. You're going to hire the staff that are at the top of their game, especially for a national carrier, because there's an element of pride to see your tail flying around the world. But on top of that, if you're hiring an executive team to run your airline, you want to give them the freedom to do it. Yes, the government is a stakeholder in the airline, and there has to be a collaborative endeavor between the government and the executives to determine the strategy the airline is going to go going forward. But the implementation of that strategy has to be left up to the executives. That's what they're hired to do. That's where their area of expertise lay. So finding that balancing act between how much you interfere and how much you don't interfere determines ultimately how successful the government is going forward. Now, if you look at smaller countries, for example, and how governments can play a huge role now in the current climate, you look at smaller countries where, let's say you have a smaller national carrier. And for example, you take that this particular country has priority with they don't have a huge economy. Their priorities may be on health, on education, agriculture, telecoms, infrastructure. And aviation is considered an important role, but not top of the list. Now, you have small airlines in those countries, which are national carriers, which may not be successful. However, opportunities may present itself for a young homegrown airline to pop up from some high net worth individual who wants to start up an airline. Historically, when that happens, it creates competition. You find that the governments try and push that small airline out of business. Whereas they should take a more pragmatic step back approach and say, okay, and try and understand how aviation contributes to it. If we take a very simple example, say that in this small country, at that airport, there's one flight a day. And the taxes charged and the fees charged by the airline equate to $1,000, say, per landing. And let's say on board you have 100 people. Ultimately, any fees that the airline incurs relating to fees, landing charge and airport charges gets translated and gets passed on to the passengers. So each passenger ends up paying an extra $10 on their ticket fare. Yes, the government makes $1,000. But let's say, for example, the government opened up and said, we're open for business, and enticed and incentivized airlines to come in, and you brought in 10 aircraft. All of a sudden now you have 10 aircraft coming in, and you could bring the fee down to $2 a passenger, and still you make twice the amount of money. But the money is not made on the passengers landing. The money is made when the people go into the airport and onwards into the country. If you take a simple example, say the people get off the flight, 10% buy a cup of coffee and 20% use the toilet facilities. Silly example, but the fact is, in the current climate, attention to detail and respect to hygiene and that, the toilet facilities will be kept up to date. There's people employed to look after them, and there's people employed to sell coffee. Those people earn revenue and bring that money back to their household, keeps a roof over their head, and they in turn spend money in their own economy. So now if you bring in 10 airlines, you now, instead of having 10 people buying coffee, you now have 100 people buying coffee, and the coffee seller has to employ someone else to serve more coffee, and maybe gets in 3 or 4 supplies of coffee per week, which means there's someone else providing it, someone else flying it in. And then you have to increase the amount of staff manning the toilets, because you have more footfall, more employment, more creation. And then outside the airport, you may need to go from 1 or 2 taxis to maybe 10 taxis, more buses, and so on and so forth. And the money that these people spend back into the economy through food and through footfall is where the governments make the money. It's not necessarily from the $1,000 they charge at the airport, but the fact of true flow of traffic into their country, and the people spending the money in the hotels, in the restaurants, employing people, and then the airport grows and has a second terminal, and people employed to service that, and so on and so forth. And that's where governments leave look at, whereby creating an environment of accepting airlines in it, making airlines business as easy as possible, reaps the reward tenfold down the line. And that's where I think the benefits come.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the message that we push at AviaDev with our air service development events. You know, at the end of the day, the airline has the asset that can be moved, and you have to work hard as a destination to encourage them to come to your destination. They're bringing these people who on average spend $1,000 each, or whatever it may be in destination. That's huge value to the whole economy, as opposed to just focusing on, well, what do they pay in that process of landing and getting out of the airport? It's that whole catalytic impact. And that's why for us, we've always been very closely aligned with hospitality and tourism industries, because they are the direct beneficiaries. And as you said earlier, the one thing that COVID has really shone a light on is, without aviation, these industries very quickly, they struggle to be tenable at all, because we hear stories about the low occupancies of hotels, the tourism businesses that are unable to survive, etc. You know, there's those elements, but then that wider ecosystem of coffee shops, taxis, supermarkets, everybody is going to struggle. So if there is one thing, I do agree with you, that has been the opportunity, and the government hopefully will see that now, and we can build back a little bit differently. But as we stand today, it's only a few countries that have actually committed to supporting aviation industry directly, which is Rwanda, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Seychelles, and maybe a couple of other ones. So what I want to get onto now is to go back to your previous life in your leasing environment. I want you to give us an honest assessment of what the leasing community's perception of Africa is, and what the investor sentiment and what the leasing company's sentiment is and has been and will be going forward for Africa, you think?
I think there's great opportunities for leasing community. I think, however, historically, lessors have leased aircraft to national carriers because they're guaranteed that their assets are protected and they're going to get paid. Well, one would hope COVID-19 will see what happens, but historically, that's how it's happened. The problem is when you're coming to emerging markets where there's not a huge history of successful airline, the issue is that investors are more risk averse. So there's going to be a lot more emphasis put on understanding the dynamic behind the airline, reassessing the airline through due diligence, and ensuring that the issues of corporate governance, which is a big issue in Africa for the investor community, transparency, safety issues, and geographical issues are dealt with. So a lot of the issue is about understanding and building the rapport between the airlines, getting them access to the investor community, getting them access to leasing aircraft. However, they have to understand what the lessor's concerns are. If you're going to lease a multi-million-dollar aircraft, or tens of $1 millions, depending on the aircraft size, to an unknown entity, you're going to have to try and make yourself comfortable that the airline is going to look after the asset. It's going to have it for X amount of years, 5, 6, 7 years, or 10 years for a wide body. The investor wants to make sure he or she is going to get paid on time. They also want to make sure that the asset is protected, and it's protected in so much as that the maintenance done on the aircraft and the records reflect the maintenance done, and that there's no adverse effect on the residual value due to the optics associated about where the aircraft was operated previously, which does play into valuations. So key to understanding is people like ourselves in Tuscar, having come from the leasing community, we can now work with the airlines and say, okay, rather than purchasing aircraft, which is a huge deployment of capital, you now have the ability to lease 5 or 6 aircraft and use the surplus capital to reinvest into your own infrastructure, your training, your staff, your development, whatever. And that we can help sit with you at the other side of the table and help educate you what the lessor will require in respect of addressing their concerns, and then bring the lessor in, where the lessor now sees that we have an airline who's got a resilient business plan, especially if they survive COVID-19. They have a resilient business plan. They have a pragmatic and holistic approach of how they're going to grow, what they've chosen the right aircraft type for the right route sectors. And then the investor gets that level of comfort that they're not quite happy that they can lease the aircraft on. I think because at the current status where it is at the moment, the investors have a lot of leasing companies, have a lot of aircraft sitting in ground. They're a lot more open now to leasing aircraft to markets they may not have done before, because they'd sooner have the aircraft flying, earning revenue, than having the aircraft parked up. So there's an opportunity. However, it's a matter of helping them understand that if they're going to give you a product, a high dollar asset, that you're in a position to look after it. And corporate governance is one area that has been on the investors community side or concern for quite a long time for Africa. I think now that the African community understand how aviation plays a key role in contributing to their economies, that they'll be more open to developing the aviation sector. A lot more airlines will be open to engaging with the leasing market. But again, it's a matter of bringing two minds together and finding a comfortable zone where both parties are willing to negotiate and do deals.
Yeah, and that's quite exciting, really, that this is going to develop some opportunities out of the crisis, that these conversations now may well be had. But the same issues, obviously, as you've alluded to, do exist. We need a robust business plan. We need serious investment. You need people to give you that confidence that asset is going to be looked after. So final question, and something that we alluded to at the beginning, we wanted to know a little bit more about the Aero Clinic, which is your new innovation for the market itself. So give us an idea in terms of the objective of why you set it up and what it is, and a bit of an overview of the team that's involved as well.
Okay, Tuscar came about from, in the current climate, I think everyone will agree that COVID is level the playing field for everybody. I think the only way through this is through a collaborative effort. Now, what the Tuscar team bring to the marketplace is not only from our experts who are European-based, but also African-based, is that we have, each of us have about 30 years experience in the international market and the African market. We have 30 years experience that was gained hands-on firsthand. However, what we looked at was that historically, when consultancy firms supported the African community pre-COVID, the value proposition, when you looked at the fees that were charged and the value proposition, they didn't equate. Also, historically, a lot of the advice given to the African community was based on a simple plug and play or a cut and paste. This worked here in the world, we'll just take that concept and plug and play it to Africa. Now, our understanding and our belief is quite simple. We don't have solutions. The only way we can help airlines or help stakeholders, be it the MROs, be it the civil aviation authorities as well, be it the suppliers, be it the airports, is by understanding what the issues they're facing. They're the ones that are governing their particular business. They're the ones that have a roadmap or aspirations of where they want to get from now today to where they need to be in 12 months' time or 18 months' time or further on. And for us to better give them advice, we have to understand what the problems they're faced with today. So we need them to explain to us, this is where what we hope to achieve, but this is what we're struggling with. As soon as we can listen to them and understand and not tell them what the answer should be, but listen to them, it's their business, they know what they want to achieve from this, we can then bring our expertise that we've gained internationally to bear and say, well, look, we know the situation that happened 3 years ago here. This was the solution they applied. Could we take some of the learning from that and maybe implement that solution or modify it to fit your situation and work forward? So it's a very open approach. The clinic is free, which in this day and age, very few things in life are free, but I think knowledge transfer is important. I think this idea that knowledge is power, I don't agree with that whatsoever. Any of my training in my career has been through learning from people who are senior to me or people who mentored me, and I learned from them passing information on to me. And it's the same belief we have. The group of people who've put them together are experts in their field. They're subject matter experts. They've come together because they believe in a collaborative approach, and they believe now is the time to work in unison to support people. So how the system works is that we've looked and focused on 6 key areas. The first one is leasing and MRO background, which is my background. We have Aaron Muntenzi, who's a veteran of the aviation sector. Aaron is a senior exec from SA who's 40 years in the business, understands business strategies and route development. We have Diko Wachuk, who is another operational expert, and Diko was CEO of Air Contractors Nigeria and also has business acumen as well. We have Clive Snook. Clive is an IATA approved trainer who has trained both the CAA and airports and ground handling people all over the world, NATO, the UN, and also a lot of the African countries. We have Brian Skeen, who's the former #2 of the Irish CAA, who was instrumental in working on various committees and boards within EASA, and was instrumental in developing safety protocols for EASA for the open sky policy. We have Dr. Jerry Conroy. Jerry is a lecturer in third level education in engineering, aeronautical engineering in Ireland, but has also done his PhD in alternative energies. We believe, even going forward again, that when it comes to airlines future-proofing themselves in the future, we're going to address issues with carbon issues and how we can address those with more fuel-efficient aircraft and so on. So we put together a team which can cover all the aspects. And on top of that, then we have a network of individuals and contacts we've made over the years, which can bring into play as and when required. But the 6 of us are here to assist. And how the system works is quite simple. On our website, there's a simple area where you land on the website, and we ask you 3 questions. We ask you your name, your contact details, and to give us a rough overview of what it is you want to discuss with us. That's all you have to do. Now, the only issue we require from you is that the questions we're going to ask for you, if you want us to engage with you actively, we need you to be honest with us. You have to tell us what your problems are. We can't second guess it. We have no idea. But working together with you, we can find solutions and move forward in this whole process. So we need you to be honest, be open, and explain your business model, explain the difficulties you're facing, and through our expertise and our knowledge transfer, we'll help you develop solutions to help you move forward and survive. And that's what our objective is.
Perfect. Great. So when's the first session and how do people book in?
Well, the clinic is open now, but we've booked up with a few, but the first session is on the 7th of this month. There's some slots available on the Wednesday, I think it's the 7th of October. So just go online, you can book a 45-minute session, or you can even before that, if you want, you can reach out to us before that. Because all we want to do is, all of the experts are doing other business as well. So we just need to know in advance, a few days in advance, what your subject matter is, so we can make sure that subject matter experts are available to participate on the Zoom call or a phone call, whichever is easier for you, to discuss the issues. But yes, we're open for business now. And we believe this is the way forward to knowledge transfer, through collaborations, how we're going to get through this COVID pandemic.
Absolutely. We totally agree with knowledge transfer and collaboration here at AviaDev, which is partly why we're doing what we're doing today. So I'll put the links to both the website and also to your LinkedIn on the show notes. So anybody listening who wants to get involved and find out a bit more and book in for the clinic, you can just find them in the show notes wherever you're listening right now. And yeah, we look forward to following the progress of the clinic, Dave. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sean, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you on this.
My pleasure. So thank you everybody out there for listening to us today. All of the contact details once again are in the show notes, so do make contact. If you enjoyed the episode, please do leave a review in the App Store. Do share this episode with one person in your network you think will benefit, and we'll see you for the next episode very soon. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Take care.